And then I was Good evening. Welcome to the third of the South African National Youth Orchestra's 2020 Summer Course Talks. The weekend has been filled with some incredible activity here online on Zoom, on Facebook, I presume, where most of you will be watching. We've had some incredible guests, including Sir Roger, I forget his name, very important Baroque conductor. Some incredible talks happening over the weekend. And I'm so delighted to be hosting the third of these talks, forming part of this summer course hosted by SANYO. Without delaying things too much, there's not that much housekeeping to do, except to thank the SAMRO Foundation for making all this possible. We will be speaking about orchestras and transformation this evening, and it gives me huge pleasure to welcome some brilliant young musicians who are going to be helping us reimagine the sort of orchestra in South Africa, asking tough questions about what does it actually mean to be an orchestral entity today? Who gets to take part? For whom does the orchestra play a role in our culture? Tackling all of these tough questions will be Lynn Rudolph, who's joining us from Cape Town, or the Western Cape at least, Andiswa Booi from Soweto, Dingaan, I'm not actually sure where he is at the moment, and we will be the four panelists chatting to you. A brief introduction. My name is Dr. William Fourie. I'm a lecturer at Rhodes University. Yeah, I'm the co-founder of the Alternative Orchestra Database, which has basically just been trying to challenge some of the slightly more conservative views about what orchestras should be and how they should function in South Africa. And I'm so excited to be chatting to our three panelists tonight. I think we're going to have an incredible conversation. So again, without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to each of our panelists. They'll be giving us a short introduction for themselves, and then they'll be presenting some ideas on what orchestras could be in this incredible country of ours. So I'm going to ask Andiswa actually first to just say a couple of words about who she is, just roughly introducing yourself, Andiswa. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Andiswa Booi, and I was born and bred in Soweto, Johannesburg. I go to the National School of the Arts, which is commonly known as the NSA. I am a violinist, and I also play the harp. So yeah.
Incredible. Thanks so much. Having a harpist and a violinist in our midst as one person. Incredible. Lynn, would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself?
Okay, so yeah, I'm a South African violist. I'm also a master's student currently at the Nelson Mandela University in PE. And I am also the host and creator of Talk That Talk, an online conversation series that addresses systemic issues in the South African classical music industry, and also in addressing general issues in South Africa.
Wonderful. Thanks, Lynn. And then Dingaan, last but definitely not least.
Yes. Hello, everyone. My name is Dingaan Chabalala, and I'm from Kimberley. I'm a trumpet player. Yeah, I did my master's in Norway at the University of Bergen. Yeah, and currently I'm just back home and looking for a job. Yeah.
Thanks so much. And I think on that point, I mean, this has been an incredibly tough year for musicians, for artists. Of course, it goes without saying that the performing arts, perhaps like many other sectors of our cultural institutions, of our economy, have been hit really hard. And I mean, even before that point, a lot of us would have had anxieties about what do you do as a musician? Where do you go and work? Who will be my employer one day? And these types of things. So perhaps that's a good place to start. For me, just to ask the question, does an orchestra in South Africa have some kind of financial responsibility towards musicians? Because let's face it, if they're not going to pay up, then why would we even want to do this? Or how can we do this if we are expected to use our hours that we could use actually making money to kind of survive? How are we supposed to use those same hours to work for free for a kind of cultural institution as such? Thoughts on that? Maybe Lynn, kick us off with ideas around what does it mean? What is an orchestra's financial kind of responsibility?
So that's actually a big question to start with, but I think it sort of goes more hand in hand with the time that they require of musicians, and if the amount of time equals the amount that people are getting paid. So if people are expected to obviously have 8-hour rehearsals or 6-hour, working hours, and they are only paying an amount that's, not possible to live off rent, the problem is that in South Africa, you have to travel either like with train, with car. So it's not very easy for people just to get around. Most of us are not using bicycles. So there are a lot of expenses that we need. You will most likely need to actually be living closer to your workplace. And most of the time it is in city centers. So that's also a big factor. So the issue for me is just that if you are expecting people to live closer, if you are expecting people to be on time, the general factors that sort of play into being, in the working industry, I think that needs to be equivalent to the amount of money that you're earning. And generally with orchestral positions, it's not possible to sort of live a comfortable life as a musician. And comfortable, I literally mean just by being able to pay your rent, being able to pay your transport, having food on the table. So literally no luxuries, just being able to provide yourself with the basic needs. So yeah.
Thanks. I mean, some really important points there. Issues of transport, how close do we live to concert halls, all this type of stuff, rehearsal spaces. Andiswa, I want to throw a question to you. As a young person, kind of perhaps not necessarily looking at orchestral career, but as somebody kind of looking forward to that next phase of your life, where you're starting to have to make decisions around what you're going to study, perhaps, where you want to move to next, where kind of opening this future up for yourself. What would you imagine as the kind of ideal situation if somebody were to come to your school, for instance, and set up a kind of open day booth and say, I'm the guy from the orchestra? What would he have to say to you to make you want to become an orchestral musician, especially if you're thinking about stuff like, is this going to pay enough for me to get a nice car or something like that?
Ooh. Well, as long as they can pay me good money, maybe if they can provide for transport, maybe food. Yeah, something like that, I think. That'll make me want to.
transport, food, that type of stuff. If they would, for instance, say, we offer you health insurance, or I mean, these are terribly grown-up things to be speaking about. I've, for the first time in my life, just recently gotten health insurance. But if they were to say something like, we would offer you health insurance, or we would help you set up a pension fund or something like that, would that make an orchestra more attractive to you?
I think so. Yeah.
Dingaan, to you, as somebody who's looking for a kind of job in the orchestral world, what would be the email or the advert that you come across that makes you think like, man, I really want to work for these people? What would you be your kind of ideal orchestral job?
You know, like you just said, you know, with all the benefits that come with uh, you know, being a musician, you know, like Lynn mentioned about um, you know, the transport payments, you know, rent payments, and all these other expenses, you know. I mean, that just makes our job easier. You understand? It makes it easier for us to focus on the gig at hand. You understand? When we have all these other things covered, then we don't have to worry all the time, because I find that a lot of musicians you know, worry about these things that we don't really necessarily have to worry about. You know, we should be going there and having fun. You know, our what we do is something that's so much fun, you know. But it's not always that much fun when we have to worry about all these other life expenses, all these other personal things that we need as people. You know, I mean, I don't have much experience with orchestras in South Africa. However, I have experience with orchestras in Europe, and I know that up there, most of your expenses are paid. You know, you go to you get a gig from an orchestra. They call you in to come and play. Your flight will be booked, your hotel will be booked, your food, everything, and you will still get paid. So good money, you know. And so, you know, that just relieves the stress, and you focus on the music, and you focus on the gig, and you deliver the best performances on the night or on the day, and you just bless your audience with wonderful music, you know. And so, yeah, I think that would be the ideal sort of orchestra, that, or yeah, you know, orchestral culture that one would actually want to be a part of.
And I mean, I think the argument that we always hear in kind of opposition to this kind of ideal is that this is South Africa, and listen, we've got kids on the street who don't eat and stuff like that. Is that still a valid argument? Can people say we can't fund orchestras because people are not eating? Are these things that we should be speaking about at the same time? Are these things that should be brought into the same conversation? Or are these things that can help actually change the kind of situation that South Africa is in economically, if perhaps we get to the point where we have an orchestra that pays full medical, full pension, has a housing allowance, you know, that type of stuff? Would it signal some kind of change for the dire poverty that we do have in South Africa? Lynn, perhaps you can speak to that question.
I would say that would go, for me personally, it would go part and parcel with community engagement. So if the way that you are interacting with the orchestral members, and they are provided with health insurance, you know, with life insurance, general like safety, life safety, whatever, then the way that you are then further communicating with communities, with the general public, I think that relationship could sort of yeah, I don't know. I feel like that relationship could be a little bit better, because at the moment, the way that specifically orchestras are engaging with communities, it's more outreach than it is community engagement. So I think that if you can sort out the one issue where you are actually providing orchestral members with stability, then in turn they will be able to provide the community with more, because they themselves are actually, their lives are enriched. I honestly feel like if people's lives are enriched, if they feel valued, then they can go out into communities and value other people's lives. But the problem is that we are using South Africa's issue with poverty to sort of, nip all the other issues in the bud and just be like, well, we're a country that struggles with poverty, so we can't give you insurance. And I think it's definitely also has to do with mismanagement of money. So if we can just focus our attention and also our assets in the right direction, I think we can have twee vliee met een klap.
I like that. Twee vliee met een klap. I mean, this is a really tricky issue, and of course, it's not something that'll necessarily be solved tonight. But I wonder whether our generation is perhaps not the one to be setting kind of standards and sort of saying, well, there's a certain expectation that we have for orchestral institutions in the country. Hopefully one day we can get there, or perhaps not. Perhaps we need to radically rethink how orchestras' financial aspects work. But on that question, I kind of get the sense that often when we speak about the kind of economic aspects of orchestras, we are drawn into this discussion about for whom is the orchestra really? Who does it service in the country? Is it only for rich white people sitting at the top, ready to kind of splurge on a concert ticket? Or is it something that's, I mean, Lynn, you were speaking about community outreach, but I guess there's something that's exacerbated in that instance. Does the community to whom we reach out, do they form part of the orchestral culture? So the next question I want to kind of move to is, who will be our audience for the orchestra in 5 or 10 years time? Andiswa, maybe you can speak to that question. Would you want to sit in an orchestra concert in 5 years time and feel that this is the kind of thing that you want to partake in?
Yes, and I think our audience for the orchestras could be the community and other people as well. Well, everyone in South Africa can be part of the audience of an orchestra.
I think that's the type of vision that we need, and I think that's a very valid kind of point. What would you say to people who perhaps in the past have felt that the orchestra is their space, that they want to come here and they don't want to worry about other people, they just want to come and enjoy their concert and just protect their little bubble? Is there something that you would want to say to people like that, Andiswa?
Well, it wouldn't be fair if you only think about it that way, because you have to kind of give back to the people, and everyone must be part of the orchestra culture in a way. So you can't say, I want to be the only one here. Yeah, wouldn't be a good space for the orchestra, I think.
No, definitely not. That's not how I at least like my orchestral concerts. Dingaan, over to you. If you were to imagine a kind of your ultimate audience one day, whether it be in an orchestral kind of context or any kind of musical context, what would be your kind of dream audience? And I'm not necessarily speaking about race or demographics. I'm just throwing that question out to you completely. What would you love in an audience?
Well, sometimes I don't understand why like young people don't actually enjoy classical music. Like I don't know, because I love classical music. And sometimes I wonder, like, why is it that other young people of my age cannot, relate to this kind of music or this type of music, But I mean, that's also understandable. Um, you know, not everyone can, no, one shoe doesn't fit everyone, so not everyone can like the same music. And so, my dream audience would be actually, I'd like to see a lot of young people coming to concerts. I'd like to see a lot of young people. The future is young people anyway. You know, and so with that, our orchestras need to cater for those people. You understand, in terms of programs, what type of music to play at concerts as well. You understand, but the culture or the tradition is, of course, symphonic music most of the time when you go to concerts, and it's pretty much formalized type of thing, or the type of vibe, the atmosphere, so which doesn't necessarily suit some young people. You understand, and so we need to sort of find a way in which we can cater for everyone as well. Understand? I'm not saying the older generation should now move away. No, 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 no. I'm just saying, we should find a way in which we can cater for everyone, so that everyone can be able to enjoy, a performance or a concert by an orchestra. You understand? So yeah.
Some incredibly important points. Lynn, do you want to respond to some of those?
Yeah, I was just like burning to reply, but I wanted to be respectful. So just to sort of compare the sort of polar opposites of the music industry. So a lot of young people are really interested in rap music. And I think the reason for that is because rap music tends to be topical. Generally, the rap musicians or artists cover issues that are current in society. They reflect on social issues. And I think the reason why younger people are not necessarily eager to engage with classical music is because the theme of classical music is generally centered around, first of all, Eurocentrism, and the music that is played are from composers that have literally died 300-400 years ago. So it's not that I don't think that young people dislike classical music. I just think that there's nothing that personally draws them in. The venues where orchestras perform are generally in great halls and, sort of traditional concert venues. But that also has no place in the current society where younger people want to have more intimate engagement. So they are interested in art galleries. They like to see things from different perspectives. Virtual concerts were also something that were huge before lockdown, and it was a way to engage with a wider audience. So I think that if current orchestras can incorporate more topical issues, more social issues, and just incorporate younger people, not by changing classical music or the music that we play, but perhaps just the way that we are framing our concerts. We can still play Bach, we can still play Brahms, but I think it is also important to play works by women composers, but to play works by queer composers. During the Black Lives Matter movement, I think that was the perfect opportunity for all orchestras to reflect on the type of music that they're playing and the sort of images that they are portraying and putting out to the world. And I think for all orchestras, now is the time to really reflect on the message that you are sending to your audiences and also the people who are in your orchestra.
I think some incredibly valid points there. And I guess where I'm coming from in this discussion is also one of, being an academic and kind of doing the really nerdy thing always. I'm kind of interested in this discussion that sort of happens sometimes where people say, but is there really all this stuff out there? Can't we just play Mahler because, that's easy to find in the library, but I mean, we have these desires for this type of music and a more diverse program, but this music doesn't really exist, you know? And so I get interested in that bit of the discussion because, I mean, my work over the last year has shown that it's just absolutely not true. That even in South Africa, we could program a whole season of just Black composers, and we could do full concerts without blinking an eye. There's so much out there. But given that we have all this incredible music out there, how do we start making decisions about what do we actually put on the program? And both Lynn and Dingaan have said this kind of similar thing, which I find really interesting. It's about kind of, first of all, drawing young people into the audience. And I think that's a really important point. That's something that in my own arts administration kind of career, I've thought a lot about. And how do you change kind of perceptions around a concert setting, whatever that may be? But then the other thing that both of you have offered as kind of solutions is think about what you're programming. And it's striking because perhaps 15 years ago, people wouldn't have been so worried about what they were programming. They knew certain things worked. They knew that they just stuck it on their program. Now we're actually thinking, how can we use music, not advertising, not necessarily social media first, but both of you have said, how do we use the music itself to draw in young people, which also tells us kind of something else. And that's that young people are listening. We are incredibly inquisitive. You can't just put anything on the stage and expect us to enjoy it. We are incredibly inquisitive listeners and critical listeners, I think. And if we sit in a concert and 10 minutes in, we're not drawn in, man, we ain't coming back. We're not sold on tradition. We're not we're not pious like the previous generation was, perhaps. We want something lacquer. We want something good. We want something that reflects our own realities, and we want it now. And I think that says something about our generation. That's not necessarily about, you know, we often get seen as these kind of screen zombies, everybody just standing around on their phone, like, where's all the culture, you know, all that type of stuff. I think perhaps what we're saying is we look like, you know, zombies, kind of acultural zombies just floating about because we're not sold by what you're trying to kind of draw us in with. We have higher expectation. Andiswa, what would you want to hear in a symphony concert? Or an orchestral concert, rather. That's already priming. Not necessarily symphonies, but in an orchestral concert, or any kind of concert, really. If I gave you all the money in the world and could just say, go and see a concert, what would you want that concert to be? What would the music be in that concert?
I think I'd like to hear, you know, some rap, maybe to have like a drum set with a keyboard, you know, then some people rapping. Yeah, just a fun vibe.
Incredible. I think this topic of rap has come up twice already, from Lynn and from Andiswa. And if I were to ask you, how should that concert look? What would you want people sitting down playing their music? Would you want lights on stage? Would you want a stage? What would you want to experience visually, but also orally when you're sitting down or standing up?
Maybe the members of the orchestra can move around the people, different lights, bright lights. And yeah, I think, yeah, maybe they can dance also a bit if they can.
I don't necessarily always want to see some of the orchestral musicians that I know personally, good friends of mine. I don't always want to see them dance. It's quite painful. But I think something of what you're saying there is also that maybe we're moving away from an era in which we just sit down and we close our eyes and we just listen to the symphony come into our ears. Maybe there's something we're expecting from a concert that's more than just that. Am I summing it up for you correctly, Andiswa?
Yeah.
Awesome. Lynn, you were burning to say something.
I actually just want to share an experience that I had recently. I went to the Karoo and I was part of a string ensemble with marimba or vibraphone, sorry, percussion people, that performed with various artists, and one of them was a rapper. And part of that whole setup, so it was a location shooting, so we were literally in the middle of nowhere. We had mics set up. We also had a stylist, so everyone in the group had a personal aesthetic that they had. So what you were saying, where we are moving away from an era where we are closing our eyes and sort of just letting the music wash over us, I think because our generation, because we are so stimulated by visuals, we've got social media where everything is literally run by visuals. For us, it's really important that what we see is also going to draw us in. And part of, sort of decolonizing orchestra spaces and orchestral environments would also be the way that we are dressing in orchestras. It's very much still a misogynistic binary of the gender. Women have to wear this, men have to wear that. And I personally would love to see orchestral members wearing colors. If there could sort of be a color scheme for one concert, if everybody were to wear pastel, literally no gender specific clothing, and allow orchestral members to express themselves through their clothing. I think then audience members will also see that the people in the orchestra haven't just come here to sit down and play their music. They have also been engaged prior to when they are on stage. So then you will also feel that emotional connection with the members of the orchestra and the audience. So I think that's really important, that we are also visually stimulating our audience members as well as audioly stimulating them.
Some incredibly important points there. And if our viewers haven't seen some snaps of Lynn's incredible project that she did out in the Karoo, I think just go follow her on Instagram. She stuck some of them up there and it's so incredibly beautiful. You mentioned the D word, decolonization. I think you've hit onto something that maybe the way in which we as South Africans who don't necessarily tie our identity to a European center necessarily. We could, maybe we don't, or necessarily somewhere else, to the UK, to Holland, to our rivals across the Indian Ocean, Australia, or a country that's kind of finding its own voice in some ways. Maybe there's something in it that our identity does not really, or does not only resonate with a kind of oral culture that's separated from the other media in which we engage with, dance, fashion, sense of styling and makeup, the kind of visual presentation of our performance arts. And it's always struck me, orchestral music in South Africa has always struck me as slightly out of place, because it's one of the few performing arts that we have, except for experimental black box theater, in which there's no sense that visually the performer, the maker of the music, is incorporating what they're doing performance-wise with how they look necessarily. Or if they're doing so in a slightly uncritical way. Dingaan, I want to throw it up to you to kind of ask you about this whole thing. Would you want lights and flashy dresses and stuff at a performance in which you play, or what do you feel about the issue?
Oh yes, it's really amazing actually being part of an orchestra that can actually stand up and actually just move their body a little bit. is awesome. You know, just to share an experience as well. I think it was 2 years ago where the Miyagi Youth Orchestra went on tour to Europe. And, you know, we had this one composition by the conductor, Duncan Ward, titled Rainbow Beads. And it had all of the African elements in it, you know, and we played in all these prestige symphony halls, you know, these beautiful halls, and you still had audience who were actually amazed by, you know, those rhythmic elements, you know, the vibrancy within the orchestra, you know, and I'm talking about now um, uh, um, elderly people, talking about, you know, those people who really go to concerts to go listen to Mozart, you know, or Beethoven. You know, they were really impressed and really had fun, and because of how uh, the whole performance was, you know. I mean, we also played the traditional stuff as well. You understand? But when it came to that piece as well, you know, and like you talk, you know, our identity, maybe we actually need to show more of that. I think that'll, because it's also what we relate to best, you understand. And I think to the younger audience, I think that will also help when it comes to drawing them in, you know, what they relate to when they go to the concert, those visuals, those, that lighting, because that's what they see most of the time when they go to concerts, to rap concerts, or, you know, Beyonce, hip hop, you know, they see that stuff and that's what draws them a lot. You understand? And so I think maybe if we move a little bit into that direction as well, maybe something might happen.
Indeed, maybe something might happen. But of course, we also know that music is a kind of conduit or vehicle or some kind of thing, really, for many emotions, right? We often, I don't know when any of you guys have last experienced it, but sometimes we hear something that's incredibly beautiful and it makes us a little bit teary because it's just so incredibly beautiful. Or sometimes we hear stuff like Duncan's incredible piece that just makes you want to freaking get up and dance. Sometimes we hear stuff that makes us feel quite worried or anxious. Sometimes we hear things that speaks to this kind of pressing need for a contemporary response, often in hip hop and stuff like that, where you're speaking to urgent issues, you're kind of driven by the music. What type of orchestra do we imagine for South Africa that can present us with all these emotions? Flashy lights are one thing, but what could orchestras do to create a slightly more immersive experience that incorporates other emotions too? Or is it then enough to say that there's something in the visual elements of planning a concert that will inevitably kind of draw in these kind of other emotions? What would your favorite sad concert look like, or your kind of ideal sad concert? Maybe to Lynn again.
So I would say that to incorporate other sectors within the arts industry, it's always very beautiful for me when I am afforded the opportunity to create and to collaborate with dancers and singers. So, for example, you know, why can we not have dancers sort of react to the music that they are hearing? Why can we not have two stages, you know, on one platform, sort of thing? I think we can also incorporate people who have studied lighting design, sound technology. We can also use social media as a way to constantly engage with audience members, where they are seeing, you know, from the first rehearsal to the final dress rehearsal. And that then you can incorporate people who have, you know, actually specialized in music technology, in recording, all of those things. So I think if we are looking at ways to express all of the emotions and everything, you know, that happens from the first rehearsal to literally the last note in the performance, and including different mediums, including people with different expertise, then I think we are on our way to reaching a different audience, a wider audience, and expressing ourselves wholeheartedly.
Absolutely. I think we have lost Dingaan, but hopefully he'll be back momentarily. Andiswa, to you, does something of what Lynn's saying here, does something of that speak to you? Would you want to see a more inclusive kind of concert that involves dancers and people who do lighting really well and that type of stuff? Something that's maybe a little bit more multimedia?
Yes, definitely. I think dances and things like that could, kind of engage the audience of the orchestra into different emotions. Yeah.
Definitely, and I've seen some incredible concerts, recently, but last year. I mean, this has been going on for hundreds of years. In fact, if we think about opera or something like that, an immersive multimedia experience. That's not to say necessarily that we should strive for something like a Western operatic theatre for what we're trying to do in the orchestral scene. But I think there is something to say for the kind of shift in cultural thinking away from this idea of orchestral music as somehow so substantial that it can just sustain itself with no form of mediation. Of course, I love listening to Mahler symphonies, for instance, or not so much Beethoven, but Schumann or Schubert, or like these romantic composers who really depend on this kind of idea of just sitting down, shutting the world out, just being washed over by the music. I really do enjoy it, and I think there's a lot that we can learn from it. But I'm wondering whether it's enough for orchestras just to say we solely exist to perform this small canon of music in this very specific way. Perhaps orchestras are there to perform a far more multifaceted function in today's world. What would you say to that, Lynn?
I agree. I don't really have much to add on to that. But I definitely think that within a modern setting, orchestras definitely have a responsibility and a role to integrate themselves into the current society. I think if you are only going to present people with one way of thinking and one way of engaging, then that becomes a fixed culture. And as we know, culture is not something that is fixed because people create culture. So if you then do have something with, more theatrics, and you have dancers and you have people with lighting, then you are actually able to appreciate the moments of stillness a little bit more, perhaps because that moment is so centered and it's so focused on, because we've just had dancers and we've just had lights and we've just had rap music and everybody was just dancing and engaging. And now it's like, okay, we're going to play, a symphony. Let's say we're going to play a Brahms symphony. And I really think that if you are then allowing people to engage with their feelings and different sorts of emotions that are felt within orchestral concerts, then I think those quiet moments will be appreciated a little bit more.
Andiswa, what do you think to Lynn's idea? Having concerts where you, for instance, have something like rap and visual effects and dances and stuff like that, and then going into some of the more, I guess you could say, serious music or more contemplative music. I mean, being a violinist and a harpist yourself, I mean, you've probably come across some music that's, that's got a bit of emotional weight to it. Well, would you enjoy a concert like that?
Definitely, I would enjoy a concert that is diverse and versatile, where some days it's just fun, some days it's more emotion and being serious. Yeah, I think that would be nice.
Great. Yeah. I mean, that's the type of concert that I enjoy. But I mean, that's the type of music that I also enjoy. There's something about this kind of sense of contrast, sense of kind of struggle, I guess, even within a single artistic product, whether it's a piece of music or a piece of theater or a painting, even this kind of sense of something more than just what we're feeling right now, something that tells us what we're doing in the world is slightly more complex than just happy or sad. And kind of that we don't just switch on and off, type of thing, which I guess reflects, well, is why music perhaps reflects our kind of humanity so well, right? Because we can go from something quite exorbitant and quite exciting and quite kind of driving to something incredibly contemplative, almost in the same moment without even realizing it, in a single piece of music or music theater or music and other arts. And I guess that's the kind of wonderful thing that we maybe is worth kind of keeping about an orchestra. And that's where I want to sort of start moving towards now, about things that maybe do work really well in orchestras and things about them that we do enjoy and stuff like that. So Lynn, perhaps tell us something about your experience as an orchestral and a very experienced and professional orchestral musician. What are some of the things that you enjoy most about playing in the orchestra?
So it's actually been a while since I performed with an orchestra. But what I really enjoy is being a part of this massive organism and this unit that everybody needs to play their part, otherwise it doesn't work. And for me, firstly, I just enjoy the music, because the music that was written for orchestra, it's just this grandeur that is sort of, for me personally, is not matched in any other music genre. So, for example, if you take, the Brahms and Mahler symphonies, these are huge works, and to have the honor to be a part of making that music is really otherworldly. And it doesn't, I personally have to pinch myself sometimes to think that I am, part of this organism that is making that music. So I think the music that has always been written for orchestras, that will always stay, and that will always be the core of why people enjoy making orchestral music or being a part of an orchestra.
I mean, some really important points there. I think there's something about playing in an orchestra that kind of gives you the sense of being part of something more than yourself, right? It's a very communal thing, but not just more than yourself in terms of having other people around you, more than yourself in terms of participating in some kind of cultural institution or some kind of making of art in this kind of live moment, being part of the audience, being part of this kind of collective awe that people experience when they sometimes listen to this music. Of course, it's that same very same experience that sometimes drives people away from these concerts. But Andiswa, you've played in some ensembles, at least I know, as part of the ARCO project, for instance. What do you enjoy about making music with other people, for instance?
I enjoy the feeling of being with other people, working together to create something, as you can say it, art. I think I enjoy being in that space, maybe, and you learn how to work with other people and to engage with them on that level, connecting with them. I enjoy that.
And do you think that's an important kind of thing to put up on a stage one day, to say to people, listen, we're making music together, and that's a really important thing for you as audience members to see? Is there a kind of important message in making music together for people to hear and to see?
I think it might be that we are working together as one to give back to you as the people or as the audience. Yeah, I think that makes sense. I'm not sure.
It absolutely does. And I think that's a really important message. But a message that, of course, always, or that sometimes is lost in communication, perhaps. And perhaps what we're trying to think of through having this conversation is the ways in which that kind of essential message of music, making music, this kind of sharing, this kind of being together, but also this kind of thing that we are part of something larger than ourselves, is something that actually really does need to be communicated. And perhaps our kind of mission, our generation's mission, is to find ways in which to communicate that same sense of sharedness, of community, of making things together, but just in a slightly recalibrated way. Lynn, tell us a little bit about, or speak to us perhaps a little bit on the issue of community in the kind of orchestral sense. Is community really that important? Do we really want to share what we're doing? Or is community something that we can kind of do away with?
I think within a South African context, it's extremely important to engage with the community, because without the community support, you will not be able to sustain whatever you are doing. And then you will run into the sphere of our audience members are dying, when in actual fact, you just need to shift your cultural perspective of what the place of orchestra music and orchestras are in South Africa. So I think that, just to take an example, that if there's an orchestra in Cape Town and they would like to, let's say, go to a community in the Cape Flats, don't take music that has been written by white people who've died like 500 years ago, because you are not actually engaging with those people's stories. You're not engaging with the community's heritage. You need to come to that community having already at least done some knowledge, or try to get some knowledge of that community, what their culture is, what their heritage is. So bring Guma rhythms, bring African rhythms, show the community that you actually have an interest in what they are already doing and their already existing culture. I think that's very important, because sometimes the issue that we run in with community engagement is that it's just reaching out to communities. We come to these places, we want to play the Dead Ski March or whatever, give them a Coke and a donut, and then leave. And you've not actually engaged with the community. You've literally just played, music that has no relation to these people. And so it won't actually impact their lives. So then we can't then reflect and say, oh, but the young people are not interested in what we have to say or what we are playing, because you've not actually made an effort to get to know the people that you are trying to play for. So if there is at least then some sort of knowledge that you have for that community, you will definitely then receive the support of the community. And even if you don't have all the knowledge on community engagement, try to ask the community leaders, people who are engaging with the community, ask them what they would like, how they would like to be incorporated within the experience of community engagement. Because as we know, with the South African history, you can't just go to a place and be like, oh yeah, I totally see you need this, I'm gonna give it to you. Yeah, that, my friends, colonization, and we don't want another repeat of that. So we need to just have a way that people are actually engaging with communities and not, trying to impose our ideas of what classical music is or how we should engage with classical music.
I think some really important points there. And I guess when we think about community, for instance, we also think about a kind of equal exchange between all the members of that community, right? So how do we think of an orchestra as part of a community in the Cape Flats that, as you say, doesn't just go in and colonize, but actually forms part of a dialogue? Is there something, or how would it be possible, or not even that question, what is the imperative really for orchestras to kind of listen or take up a position of listening in community engagement settings, right? What can the orchestra learn from the communities in which they work? And Andiswa, I think this is kind of a perfect place for you to chime in, because I know you, or I know of you at least, through my friend Claudia Denker, who has been involved with the ARCO project in Soweto. And a lot of our discussions have been about, how do we, or how does she and how does the project there really start moving away from this thing of just white people coming in and teaching violin in Soweto, to something where there's a kind of equal exchange in knowledge. And I think in some sense also the kind of insights that you've brought to this discussion so far has sort of shown us that, yes, actually, when you just stop and pause and say, wait a second, what would you like to say? Then we can learn some incredible things. Do you think orchestras should just come in and teach kids how to play violin? Or do you think orchestras should listen to the people they're engaging with in environments like Soweto, for instance?
I think orchestras can also listen to or try to be part of the environment. Like, for example, in Soweto, I think a lot of people there like our cultural music, our indigenous music with indigenous instruments. Maybe you can have like workshops, no? Yeah, I think something like that.
I definitely think that type of exchange is really necessary. So thinking about more indigenous forms of music, thinking about workshops, thinking about ways in which we can actually speak to each other, really. I mean, that's really important. I'm going to turn now to a kind of last question for this evening, and we're going to wrap up, and then basically going to allow the the summer course to take its kind of natural road, which is playing instead of just speaking. But I want to sort of end off with this question, and I'll ask both our remaining panelists. I think Dingaan has just disappeared, but our remaining panelists, just to kind of speak to the idea of the future of orchestras. What is the future of orchestras in South Africa? If you were to venture, if you were to not even put money on it, but if you would want to, what is a future perhaps that you would want for orchestras in South Africa? Lynn, if you would hit us off.
So without being too radical, I would want it to be queer, I would want it to be anti-racist, I would want it to be colorful, and most importantly, I would want the future of orchestra in South Africa to reflect the current society which it is in. So whether it is in 2020 or whether it is in 2050 or 3020, but that the orchestra always has a role to play in society and is not an organism that stands on its own, but is constantly engaging with the society that they have currently found themselves in.
I think there's something incredibly powerful about what you say there. And I do hope that can be the future of orchestras, because perhaps we've arrived at a moment historically in which we can sort of shake off the dust and emerge as something incredibly powerful and incredibly beautiful, and really just kind of be of this place in which we do find orchestras and incredible orchestral musicians, of course, but find a way of really kind of just breaking free of some of these shackles that you speak of. Andiswa, what would you want from an orchestra one day?
I would like the orchestra to be more into this generation, not to only stay back then, like to include more young people, maybe. Yeah. and yeah, to be as colorful and anti-racist and queer as Lynn said. Yeah, I think that would be nice.
I think also, you know, the fact that we return to some of these themes in this conversation. I mean, we are only a small handful of people, right? But also just to kind of flag up that perhaps even though we're just three now, we were four earlier this evening, but maybe three voices are enough to signal a kind of turning point in orchestral thinking in the country. Maybe it's enough just to sit down and listen to this talk and rethink the way that we're going to do things. Maybe we're representative of something, maybe we're not, and you know, that's okay too. But I do want to say that I think with people like Lynn and Dingaan and Andiswa on our side, we can't go wrong. This has been an incredible discussion, and I want to thank all our panelists. I want to thank Lynn, I want to thank Andiswa, I want to thank Dingaan in his absence, but I also want to thank Sophia Wells for championing this kind of discussion and for kind of lining us up and giving us a platform to speak about some of these slightly trickier things. The South African National Youth Orchestra has always been a kind of platform that I've found incredibly energizing in the South African orchestral scene. It has been the leader in my mind, both in terms of what's happening on programs, in terms of what's happening in with regards to diversity in orchestras. It's a leader in terms of education. It's a leader in terms of thinking and imagining an alternative kind of orchestral space and institution really in the South African context. And for that, I just want to give a massive round of applause to Sophia and the South African National Youth Orchestra team. Ooh, I can hear everybody applauding at home with me. On that note, I'm going to say thanks to all our viewers who have been watching. Thanks to our panelists, thanks to SANYO, thanks to SAMRO Foundation for paying for this panel. And we hope that you do tune in for this, for SANYO's actual online concert later this month. I saw ticket sales go online today. Everybody dive in, buy as many tickets as you can. I think it's 80 Rand for standard tickets and 50 Rand for pensioners. Sophia will correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sure, in the comments on this video. Do stay tuned. I think we've had a hell of a year. I think we all deserve some incredible music played by some incredible young people. So without further ado, thanks everybody, and we'll see each other soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.